Okay, well, let's start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Fernando Santiago. I am Industrial Policy Officer at UNIDO in the headquarters in Vienna. I would like to welcome you very warmly to this third webinar, the third session in our series of 3 pilot webinars that we are running as part of the United Nations Interagency Task Team for capacity for the STI for the SDGs. And remember, this is the work stream 6 on capacity building, and we do these webinars in collaboration with several UN entities under the sort of overall guidance of colleagues from UNESCO and UNTAD. Right, this is the third session in a series of 3. The first webinar, it was more of an introductory webinar for current approaches to science, technology, innovation policy, and we introduced the issues of SDGs, and we talk about directionality and how the SDGs also imply something that goes beyond economic consideration, but also environmental inclusiveness and other aspects proper of the SDGs. We went down in session 2, sort of a bit more detail in so how to design instruments. We showcased some examples of instruments, including during the pandemic, right? How countries are trying to respond to the pandemic through different activities that involve science, technology, and innovation. For this third and final session, we go further down in a sort of a bit of detail, propose the case of innovation and entrepreneurship, and we have this program for today. In addition to these welcome remarks, the next step would be to have a bit of a discussion on conceptual issues. Then we move on to some experiences now with the participation of some of the regional colleagues in the region, so they will share with you some of the concrete cases in 2 regions. You should all have received, prior to the webinar, an exercise where we sort of ask you to read some cases, real-life cases, of course, with some modifications of innovative entrepreneurs, and then to reflect on some of the policies, and we will be reviewing that case later on in this webinar. Then the 2 final slots, of course, we need to sort of bring this third session to a closure, but most importantly, and I would really encourage you to stay with us and ask you kindly to stay with us, because we would like at the end to have some time to interact with you and get your feedback, comments, and suggestions. As I mentioned, this is a pilot, and so for us it's very important that you give us the chance to listen to your responses and your comments, okay? That would be towards the end of the session. So today, many of us have been with you already. Again, my name is Fernando Santiago from UNIDO. We also have colleagues from WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, in particular our colleague Tamara Nanayakara, who is part of the SMEs and Entrepreneurship Support Division at WIPO, where she supports SMEs in using the intellectual property system more effectively and supporting SME intermediaries in developing their IP support services for SMEs. She's an attorney at law from Sri Lanka with a LLB and LLM from the University of Colombo in Sri Lanka, and a master's in international management from the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota in the US. We also have Ralph Heinrich from the Economic Commission for Europe. At UNIC, Ralph works or manages the Intergovernmental Committee overseeing the work of on innovation and competitiveness. He has over 15 years of experience analyzing innovation policies, advising governments in the New USA region, and building capacities. Our colleague Nicolo Giglio, who was also in webinar 2 from ECLAC, with more than 20 years of experience in the design and implementation of productive and business development policies, including investment attraction, export promotion, and innovation. So he's been at ECLAC since 2015. Dimo Karlovsky, also he's from UNTAD, and he's the one responsible for you to have some homework previous to the webinar. He's an economist staff at UNTAD, He has been working in the field of innovation policy since 2009 and has been in the principal officer and contributing author to the UNTAD STI policy reviews, the cases of Oman, Rwanda, Uganda, and currently in Zambia. Cornelia Tsinova, who already you have been familiar with her, is assistant program specialist in science policy and capacity building at UNESCO, where she's been there since 2002. And among other things, she is behind the Global Observatory on STI Policy Instrument of GoSpin. Clovis Freire, who is an economist and computer engineer specialized in technological change and innovation at UNTAD, where he leads currently the drafting of the Technology and Innovation Report 2020. Together, Cornelia and Clovis are all focal points for this workstream 6. And in the background, even though you don't see them, but they are there, Sen-Mei Wang and Despina Susoni from UNESCO, helping us with some of the exercises. Of course, you might be familiar with Professor Ludovico Alcorta, who has been with you in previous occasions. Cornelia, can you please help us with that?
Yes, thank you very much, Fernando. Thank you very much. So we will start with this first part of our session, and we will start with two presentations. So this session will be specifically on the conceptual issues on innovative entrepreneurship. And in this session, we will have a presentation by Fernando from UNIDO, providing some of the background and the presentation of concepts, and followed by a presentation by our colleague Tamara from the World Intellectual Property Organization. We propose to have an open discussion once we finish the two presentations, but during the presentation you can start addressing your questions in the chat, and then once we finish the two presentations we will open discussion and interaction with you. So thank you very much. Fernando, you have the floor, please.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Cornelia. Well, I mean, as we saw already in the first Mentimeter question, we would like to really have an introductory portion with you. What we normally tend to see, innovation and entrepreneurship are activities that can be understood in separate ways. You know, innovation as an activity that implies the generation of improved or significantly new goods and services, or new ways to address a consumer demand, right? Entrepreneurship, as many of you already indicated, it's a process of identifying and implementing business opportunities, right? But these things tend to be together. These activities tend to go together. What is important to note here is that it's not necessarily just any other ways of creating innovation and entrepreneurship. It's really something that we see as contributing to job creation, productivity growth, and even, you know, in the context of SDGs, it is important how to translate some of the challenges in SDGs into possibilities for making business, and in that process contributing to address poverty and, of course, issues around formalization. So this SDG notion reinforces the idea that economic and technological aspects are as important as the social and distributive considerations. You know, where is innovative entrepreneurship when this convergence between innovation and entrepreneurship? You know, not every innovative business qualifies, right? So this is really a way to understand this, implies understanding what I mentioned earlier in terms of creating new opportunities for growth, the emphasis on novel products, services, ways to address a demand in the market. We tend to associate this with SMEs, but not all SMEs. And you will see, for example, the idea that, you know, we look for the gazelles or the unicorns, that would imply, again, it's not just to be small, but also the young companies, but with very dynamic, with a lot of potential for growth, for creating opportunities for jobs, highly qualified jobs, right? So it's this sort of area here that really is important for us in terms of where are we talking about, and that is the space where we see. So it's not all kind of business, innovative business. It really has to do with some very dynamic young companies, might be small, but dealing really with a lot of growth potential. But these activities are not easy, right? So entrepreneurship and innovative entrepreneurship in particular requires very strong support, even though sometimes, it's difficult to really understand, and we will address some of these questions. So people tend to think of finance as the main bottleneck, but we also see, because we are dealing with very specific kind of companies, things like knowledge, access to technology, to people who help them understand markets, to sort of mentoring some people who give them experience that they might not have, even though they have the technology or access to markets, right? The human capital, it's an important barrier. But beyond also that is, the market, how enabling is the market? How important are the support and the infrastructure that these entrepreneurs face? How important is the culture, right? So the capabilities around in terms of education, interactions between different companies and universities, of course, regulations. And all of these needs, right, is what we create the space for policy, right? You have different areas of intervention, from finance to market. I will not go into details in many of these areas because of the time, and of course, it makes more sense when we have a concrete problem. But just to give you a flavor of how these things happen or how these considerations are important, let me just now pass the floor to my colleague Tamara, who is going to sort of give us a bit of a sense of this particular issue of intellectual property, which is a question that many of us usually have in mind when we talk about entrepreneurs, right? So when you are ready, Tamara, just please, you can help us with that. But this is really just a quick introduction that I wanted to give you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Fernando, for this presentation, for really presenting the concepts around the innovative entrepreneurship. Please, Tamara, if you'd like to start your presentation, sharing your screen.
Do you see it? Thank you very much, Cornelia, for your patience. And thank you to all of you for your participation in this webinar. I'd like to, as Fernando mentioned, talk about Fernando's last slide, where he talked about the policy instruments to support innovative entrepreneurship, and one of them being intellectual property, and to drill down a bit as to what this means. So when we talk about intellectual property rights, what exactly are we talking about? We are talking about a basket of rights that have been created by law that allows innovators, inventors, and creators to own their innovative outputs. So if you're having a technical solution to a problem, you have perhaps a business sign and a logo for your business. You have you use certain shapes or forms or designs for your products to make them more attractive, or you have certain creative works such as videos, music, software, certain writing, etc. Or you have some kind of business information that makes your company more competitive, and they don't want others to know about that. So these all give you the option of being protected by patents, trademarks, designs, copyright, and trade secrets. So this is what we refer to as intellectual property rights, and they are used in a comprehensive manner by businesses to promote their business objectives. So we'll take an example, and we look at the humble potato, which is not intuitively the most high-tech product. If we talk about fried potatoes, but we all know that this is a multi-million dollar business. So if you look at this company, for example, they use intellectual property very aggressively to market their products. The shape of the chip is protected by designs. The recipes are guarded as trade secrets. The copyright is in the packaging, in the photographs of the package, etc. And then the trademarks are protected all over the world the lays, the word lays. And then there are a number of patents protecting the way in which you peel the potatoes, you cut the potatoes, you fry the potatoes. All of these things have patent protection behind them. So there's a very aggressive protection by intellectual property of this product. So you can exploit intellectual property either by integrating, as we just showed, the IP into the product itself, or you can have other options, because you may not necessarily be using all your IP in the product. So you might use it, you might sell it, you might license it or franchise it, which is another way of licensing, which is giving others the right to use your IP. IP is very useful in collaborations, in joint ventures, because people are attracted to partner with you when you have a good IP portfolio, and it is useful for accessing finance. So these are the different ways in which you could use and exploit IP. So how does this interact in the innovation system? So I have a rather simplistic impression of the innovation system, and from an IP perspective, there are two main pillars, I would say. There is the knowledge base and the industrial and service sector. And the knowledge base, we're talking about universities, public research organizations, and the research that takes place within industries, within the private sector. And then there's the industrial sector, which is by and large SMEs. And how does the IP system support this system? You have IP that stimulates the production of knowledge, because those who are producing knowledge, the researchers, they are confident that their output can be protected and they can own that output. That incentivizes researchers. So there is a production of knowledge. And by virtue of ownership, you create an asset, and that asset can be dealt with, enabling that transfer of that asset to the industrial and service sector, because you create collaborations and people are able to engage and people are able to deal with that asset. So that enables the transfer of that asset, and then that asset is converted into new and improved goods and services that add value to society, that provide solutions to the community. So, and creates possibilities through the intellectual property system to differentiate those products and to create a healthy, competitive market. So these are the things that are important from an IP perspective, that you need an effective IP system to stimulate the production of knowledge. You need the effective management of the IP system, of IP rights with universities and research institutions to own and transfer that knowledge to the private sector, who will in turn convert them, and you have to companies have to know how to manage the IP that they have, so that they can have a more competitive focus on their businesses. And just to take you back a second to look at the other aspects, we talked about a supportive policy framework, where different policies are there that support the innovation system. There are intermediaries that support the knowledge base and industrial and service sector. And these are also part of the overall policy mechanism that have IP elements embedded in them. So if you talk about agriculture, health, education, industry, and other such relevant policies, there are IP elements that need to be taken into account in those policies. You could encourage scientists, whether they're foreign or from the diaspora, into the country through immigration policies, and then you got to have IP elements protecting their inventions. You use government procurement to support and promote innovative local companies, and then there are IP issues that come up for those solutions that are created by those companies. You have to capture, because the government is also a prolific innovator, and you need to be able to capture those innovations through using the IP system creatively. You can encourage IP intensive companies to bring their R&D and commercialize in the country. And then risk capital is an important issue, where companies do not have the money and the financing to take their products into market. And you need to facilitate through policies the venture capital and angel investors in the country. And you need to encourage foreign R&D to locate in the country through investment policies and tax policies. So as you see, IP is a part of all of these different entities that consist of the innovation system. And therefore, it's an important element to take into account and to be mindful of when you're putting in place innovation policies in the country. And thank you very much. And that concludes my brief remarks on what I want to say about the relevance of IP in innovation policy making. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Tamara, for this presentation. To raise their hand, maybe we can take one question from the chat, which I think comes from our colleague in Lebanon, who is asking if there is no intellectual property process in the country, if we can develop an innovation and entrepreneur system. I think perhaps Tamara, you would wish to comment on this question.
Yes. Thank you, Cornelia. As I said, IP is an important element in entrepreneurship and developing an innovation system. So just as much as there are many other elements that contribute to an innovation system, and I would leave my other colleagues to mention about that. But for me, if there are no IP laws in the country, then there is no way in which you can protect your innovation and you can so against copying, and so people are free to copy, and that is a real dampener on innovation, I would say. So for me, if there is no IP system in the country, that would be a true dampener on innovation. And there was another question on the innovative product registered in one country and applied to another. If I may just respond to that as well, Cornelia.
Yes, please go ahead, Tamara. Thank you.
Yeah. One important point that is raised here, and which I didn't mention, is that IP is a territorial concept, meaning it is something that is relevant only in the country in which the country or region in which the right has been obtained. So if you have obtained the right in country A, but you're marketing your product in country B, in which you have not obtained a right, then you have no rights in country B, and others are free to copy and to use your invention or innovation. So this is something that is important to keep in mind, if that's the point that is made in that question.
Yeah, if I can comment on this idea of the IP, I think it's a controversial issue. No, I mean, it's sometimes the idea of protecting the technology, and sometimes the question is, do we need one? Well, as Tamara mentioned, if you want to protect and encourage, it's good, but in some cases we see innovations or people having this kind of inventive activity, and one of the barriers, of course, is then how to actually scale up, and the scaling up gets stuck because there is no way to assign property, right, to the technology, to assign the benefits, to sort of see who do you negotiate with, how do you share the. So I think in this case, the idea of IP become important. Of course, there are different ways of using the intellectual property, but in a way, some of the issues around IP mean also that people tend to associate intellectual properties with patents, but that all sorts of things. And I think it's also important for policy to actually make sure that there is an understanding of the different ways of using IP, right? So it's a bit of a contextual issue sometimes in how to actually use the IP, and we will see later on some of the examples with our colleagues from the commissions. No? Yes, I saw somebody raising the hand, Cornelia.
Thank you, Tamara and Fernando. Yes, I would like to give the floor to our participant from Bhutan. Furba, you have raised your hand. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Tamara, for this very convincing presentation on IP. So my question is, given the importance of IP for innovation, I just would like to ask, what is the fundamental thing that needs to be get right in terms of strengthening IP in the country?
Well, fundamental thing to get right is I think one needs, and I think most countries through the WTO have a basic IP system in the country. But I think the fundamental thing to get right is that each country needs to assess what their priorities are, what their industrial priorities are, what their economic objectives are, and the IP system should support that. So it is some within the norms of the World Trade Organization rules. So it is important to see if your industrial approach is, I don't know, in the area of agriculture, or if your industrial approach is in the area of manufacturing textiles, if you know, then different IP rights would become important and different IP regimes would be important. But and that requires a more fine-tuning of the policies and things that you have in place, and to see how you can actually use the IP system to advance those objectives. But the basic IP system, I think, is something that most countries do have now and has put into place by virtue of the overall trading regimes that we have today. Anyone else would like to complement that?
Thank you, Tamara. I think we have the occasion to further develop on this question. I would like to give the floor also to the participant from Lebanon, Mr. Ahmad Jamal. Please take the floor.
Hello, Hello, you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I have looked for the 4 cases, that you have sent to us, the cases of innovation and entrepreneurship that we have this week concerning this webinar. The 4 cases I looked, I don't see anywhere where we can introduce the IP, especially, for example, in the quick cuts, the case B. Somebody who has developed a new way to quick cut hair, and even if I look, for example, in agro tools, the case A in this case, where they took something which was done in India to make a motor cultivator with 4 wheels. This has been done in India, and they do it in their country. You see, does the cases like that, the 4 cases that you have sent to us, really need an IP innovation? I mean that a protection for this innovation certificate, because I don't see really something new. There was innovation in the country to create employment, etc., or in the management process, but I didn't see something directly innovative with respect to what's going on around the world. You see? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. Tamara, if this is fine for you, maybe I can give the floor to Dimo, our colleague from INSAT, who has prepared this exercise for discussion. Dimo, please take the floor.
Hi, thank you, Cornelia. Hello, Ahmad Jamal. Thank you for these very interesting questions.
Thank you, Dimo.
Well, the cases that are chosen, these people really exist, and I have actually talked to them about this. And I will say that, the problem with IP is that, as Tamara pointed out, is that, people say IP and all of a sudden everyone thinks of patents. And that's where it starts, that's where the story ends. But this is, a false impression. In fact, IP is a very broad range of how would you say, of legal formulations that allow people to exercise property over their intellectual innovations. In talking to the fellow from Quick, now I've changed the names. These are not. I'm not using the real names nor the real names of the companies. Okay, because I did not feel comfortable. But clearly, for Quick Cuts, the key concern here is to have a trademark, and the trademark is the one that will necessarily, to some extent, protect the business model which underlies his development. So there is a case. It is one of the. I don't know where to say. Tamara, is it all right if I say weaker types of IP for a trademark, or easier one in that sense?
I wouldn't call it weaker, but it's equally important, I would say.
Yes, it is important in the sense that, unlike, for example, a patent, there's no filing, there's no examination. So you go and you register your trademark, and more or less, if there isn't the same one somewhere else, then the business is done. So it would be very important for the fellow there to register a trademark. And indeed, many businesses fail to register a trademark because they're not aware that such IP protection exists. In the case of agro-tools, there's also a certain question there. I don't think that will pass muster for a patent, because clearly there are previous incidences of such innovation in other countries. But perhaps a lesser type, a utility model, maybe could serve as well. But then again, as Tamara pointed out, not everything is in the actual specified right, and there is such a thing as a non-disclosure and business secrets as well, which need to be realized as somewhat effective tools. But having said that, if you see in the spectrum, not every innovative action requires IP or the highest type or the strongest type of or the most complex IPs. It is a spectrum. What is important is that every innovative entrepreneur becomes aware of what is on option there and chooses the right thing for what they think is their business.
Yes, thank you very much, Dimo, for these answers. Perhaps we can take one question that was in the chat concerning experience in helping grassroots innovators from developing countries in getting the intellectual property. Fernando, perhaps you would like to comment on this?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, I don't have a direct answer to that, but I remember, for example, you should be familiar with this network, right? The Honeybee network from Anil Gupta. One of his strategies, right? And eventually he was at the government and the innovation agency in India, where the process starts by knowing who these grassroots innovators are, what they are bringing in, and what is behind this underlying innovation, right? And I remember, I mean, that's something that people might want to look at more closely. He started some kind of funding, special funding from the innovation agency in India, if I'm not mistaken, to actually try and scale up some of these technologies, right? Some of these inventions that had value. So it started by documenting them, by putting it up in the open for people to know, and making sure that what he used to call the invisible hands were no longer invisible. So that is a way to work with the grassroots. Of course, many of these things here, the challenges is that you're dealing with the informal activities most of the time, or technologies that are not so easy to sort of protect because they can be easily replicated. And that's what we sort of mentioned at the beginning. The challenge is in how to identify the innovators, how to qualify the innovation. That would be a discussion to what extent some of those grassroots are really innovations or are just problem solving that implies some kind of tool. But that is a case for, if you were interested, the Honeybee network and the connection in India, and this kind of documenting and creating some catalogs or things like that for people to get visibility is one of the ways that I know people have been dealing with. And some other times is to try and connect the NGOs who are driving, also supporting some of these grassroots to actually enter into the negotiation, right? But some multiple. I don't have a sort of a concrete answer to give you in this case, but those leads that I remember might be useful for you to look into.
Yes, thank you very much, Fernando. We'll close the session, the part one of this session, but of course the discussion would continue later on. Perhaps just a very final remark on a question by our participant from Timor-Leste, how to control and protect the copyright. Tamara, perhaps you would like to comment on this. It's a very broad and complex, but maybe a quick comment, please.
Well, copyright is one of the rights that you don't need to go through a formal registration system, whereas for patents, designs, and trademarks, you need to go to a government office and fill an application form and go through a process to obtain that right. Copyright comes into being the moment you create something. So you are immediately an owner of a copyright the moment you create some kind of copyright work. In some countries, you have a register that you can go and register it, like in the US, but most don't have, and it's not required by international law. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Tamara. I see just one more hand raised. Mr. Quenzang Togday, please have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening to everyone. This is Kunzang from Bhutan. So I just wanted to ask one question. I don't know how far I'll put this into, I don't know how I'm going to convince this question, but I'll try my best. Just an example, I'm going to set an example. The countries like Bhutan, Tibet, Tibet part of China, northern part of India, we have a similar kind of culture. And especially we have Bhutan is popular for the silk woven cloth. In our local terms, we call it Kishuthara. So if you want to, obtain the trademark for this Kishuthara, but then we don't have the documentation to prove it as, ours, because it has been found that the similar patterns to the silk woven cloth found in Thailand, northern part of India, like Sikkim, and even in China. So I just wanted to know, how are we going to, find ways to resolve this kind of issues, amongst the countries? So I don't know if the question was clear.
Yes, I think it was. Perhaps Tamara, you would like to conclude this part with some.
Very clear and very tough question. You give me a very hard one for the last one, but yes, the options of geographic indications or trademarks or collective marks or certificate marks for these kinds of products. But when different countries are involved with similar products, I think this requires something beyond IP, because IP tools are there. You can have, like I said, a geographic indication that is attached to your locality, and that you have to show that there are specific characteristics that come from that locality that gives you the right to call this a certain name and to market it in that name. But if all the countries have those same characteristics, then you're going to be in trouble. So it's better to go for a collective mark or a certificate mark, where you form an association within your country of those who are producing this product, and that association will regulate how that product is going to be marketed, and you have then a trademark or a collective mark that will market that product. Then you won't get into trouble with but if you have a geographical indication, that is a bit more sensitive in terms of different countries. So it is, I must confess, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm hazarding a guess from basic information, but it is a good question, and it requires a bit more in-depth thinking as to how you can manage this from the context of different countries. But from within a country, of course, you have different options, like I said, GIs, collective marks, or certificate marks to market that product.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick comment, if you allow me. I mean, now maybe I was asking. Because I think one of the examples that might be is the PISCO between Chile and I think Peru, no? So might not be an answer, but maybe a case to look into, sort of how these products that span across boundaries, because as you mentioned, two countries or two communities sit adjacent to one another, even though they are in different countries. Maybe some of the options of how the processes is going on around assigning rights, and that can be a solution, right? But I guess it's really maybe something to look into more carefully in terms of history and, of course, the geopolitics of the IP, right? Yes, thank you very much, Cornelia. And I see, I mean, it took a bit of time, but now you guys are warming up. So let's move on. I think this was the first part, more on the concepts, and as you see already some of the challenges in terms of agreeing how to analyze this. But let's move on now with two examples, and I will ask Ralph to start sharing your screen. Ralph will present a case of in Europe, central in the region where they are responsible. We also going to move on now to some of the other issues, so you can see the complexity of assigning protection or using instruments, STI instruments to address this issue of innovative entrepreneurship. Please, Ralph, the floor is yours. And please also continue to put your questions and comments on the chat. The floor is yours. Thank you.
So yes, so we will now look into a little bit more depth and at some of the issues that were already raised in the first session, and we will do so by means of some country examples, and then later on also the company cases that were circulated yesterday. And the first issue that we're going to look into is the financing of innovative entrepreneurship. In the Mentimeter survey that we just had, this did not come up as a main driver of innovation or of innovative entrepreneurship, but I think it's fair to say that a lack of access to suitable financing can certainly be a major obstacle. So I will discuss some of these issues based on the work that we at UN-IATT have been doing with Belarus. It's a country we've been working with extensively for several years. We've analyzed their innovation policies, we've advised them on policy reforms, and we have provided some capacity building as well. And in the chat, you will find some links to the publications, presentations, and other materials that provide more details than I can give in this talk. So some background on Belarus. Middle-income economy with a skilled workforce and manufacturing base and a tradition in science and applied research, in part for historical reasons. And so it does have some good building blocks for innovative entrepreneurship, but it does not seem to get that much out of it, as measured, for instance, by the innovation output score of the Global Innovation Index that WIPO is publishing. So it's fair to say that the innovation potential of the country is unfulfilled, and as we will see, part of this unfilled potential is on innovative entrepreneurship. What our research has shown is that they have a highly competitive software industry. For instance, EPAM Systems was founded over 20 years ago in Belarus and is now a $1 billion company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. They also have some large state-controlled manufacturers that export globally and that generate some innovation. For instance, the Minsk Tractor Works. It's said that 1 in 10 tractors in the world is from Belarus. And apart from that, they have some small innovative companies with international markets outside of software, but these companies do not grow. They stay small. And so they do not really make a significant contribution to job growth or productivity growth at the aggregate level. And we have some case studies of such companies in our recent Innovation for Sustainable Development review of Belarus. And as a final point, there's also a few new businesses being created on an annual basis. Now, the government, of course, realizes this, and it has created some policy support measures, but they have not been particularly effective so far, basically for 2 reasons. One is that they've taken a science push approach that is not in tune with the needs of the market. For instance, the State Committee on Science financing science and research, and then expecting the Ministry of Economy to take the research results and to somehow commercialize them, but with no real links between academic institutions and businesses. And the second problem has been an excessive risk aversion on the part of policymakers. They have offered some financial support to innovative entrepreneurs, but on the expectation that the government would not lose any money on any project. That is, all projects were supposed to either succeed, or if they failed, the innovator was supposed to pay back the funds. And the result of this approach has been that these types of programs have not really been taken up by potential innovative entrepreneurs. So why has there not been a lot of dynamic growth in innovative entrepreneurship in Belarus? And I should add that this is, of course, not a problem that is confined to Belarus, but is something that we've seen in many other countries, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with this issue. So, as was outlined in the first session, one possible problem is a lack of suitable financing, and this has indeed also been the case in Belarus. There are, of course, bank loans available, but these are not particularly suitable for innovative enterprises, particularly at an early stage, when they lack a track record, they lack collateral, they lack a proven business model, and they are highly risky. They also lack positive cash flow. And so instead of traditional loans, what is really needed are equity-type financing instruments tailored to the high-risk environment of innovative entrepreneurship, such as business angel and venture capital investments. And there is a clear case for government support here, because there can be a chicken and egg problem where if there are no innovative entrepreneurs, then there is no business opportunity for specialized providers of financing, such as venture capitalists, and so they will not enter the market. And on the other hand, if there is no specialized finance available, then it's very difficult for innovative entrepreneurs to emerge. And so there is an opportunity for the government here to act as a catalyst for the process, for establishing a venture capital industry and promoting innovative entrepreneurship. But of course, a lack of supply of suitable finance is only part of the problem. The other side of the coin is that there can also be a lack of demand for finance, because there are too few bankable innovative projects. And so in addition to policies that stimulate the supply of finance, we also need complementary policies to stimulate the demand of innovative projects. And this is something that Nicolo will be looking into in the next presentation as well. So one possible solution, public-private venture capital financing, and we have developed a few options for the government of Belarus on this, together with a national task force. And the work that we've done is based on experience of the United States, for instance, in the 1950s with the Small Business Investment Companies program, of Israel in the 1990s with the YOSMA program, of Chile with the Capital Semilla or Seed Capital Fund program, and also Start-Up Chile. And again, I believe that Nicolo will be talking about that in the next presentation. And yeah, but basically the points in this slide apply also to many other countries that we have been analyzing. So again, the goal should be for the government to invest public money into innovative companies in a way that crowds in private capital rather than crowding it out, so that a vibrant venture capital industry can emerge. And to achieve this crowding in, the government should try to lower, in particular, the risk-adjusted costs of entering the market for private investors and venture capital managers. And the government itself should try to take on a significant chunk of the risk initially, and in this way it can signal to potential private investors that the country is serious about developing a venture capital industry and promoting innovative entrepreneurship. As a caveat, the experience from many countries suggests that the government is generally not very good at selecting companies for investment, and should perhaps be added, the government is usually particularly bad at deciding which investments to get out of, because they do not potential for high growth. And so these decisions should ideally be left to the professional private fund managers that the government should partner with. And we've identified essentially three options or models for public-private venture capital financing. One is equity carry, where the government essentially accepts shares from the private venture capital fund as collateral for subsidized loans. Co-investment, where the government matches the investments made by a private venture capital fund into the projects that the fund managers select, or a funds of funds model, where the government creates its own fund that then invests in private venture capital funds. And the first option is the easiest to implement, but also probably has the least catalytic effect on the emergence of the venture capital industry. The latter model, the funds of funds model, requires that there is already a significant number of venture capital funds in the market. And so perhaps a good compromise for a country like Belarus could be the second model, the co-investment model. Two more points. Since there are very few experienced venture capital investors and fund managers in Belarus at the moment, there are a few, but really only a few. The aim of a program to stimulate or to catalyze the industry should be to bring in foreign fund managers and investors and to draw on the existing experience that exists elsewhere. And in order to further enhance the credibility of such a program, and perhaps also to supplement it on the financial side, one possibility is to cooperate with international financial institutions such as the World Bank, IFC, or the EBRD, which have co-invested with governments and with private venture capitalists in a number of countries already. So that could be a good practice also for Belarus. Thank you for your attention. And back to you, Fernando.
Thank you, Ralph. Can I ask you to please stop sharing? Please, I see still comments and questions. That's what we would like to continue having. Nicola, can you please share now? And Nicola will have a very interesting case of Chile, and so that you could see some of the real case examples. A very interesting case. Nicola, your floor is yours.
Well, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. In the next 7 minutes, I'm going to share the case of Start-Up Chile. Start-Up Chile is a government startup accelerator run by the Chilean Economic Development Agency. Just as a context, Chile is a small country in South America, about 18 million people. But before entering into the details of the Start-Up Chile, let's put it in a context, in a historical context, in terms of the science and technology policy development in Chile, and the Chilean Economic Development Agency, who is the agency that ran this program. At the beginning of the 90s, it was created the Science and Technology Program with a loan from the IDB Bank. This program was the first attempt in Chile to create a whole science and technology policy, an innovation policy. Before this year, there's only one fund, Fondesit, directly to support projects of basic research of individual researchers. Under this program, there were created two another funds, Fondef, that was trying to link projects between universities and companies, and one specific to support innovation projects presented by companies. This was something unique in Chile to create a program in order to support innovation within companies. And for the next decade, all the effort was put into improve all the innovation policy within Corfo. So after a decade, near 2000, another kind of thoughts appear in the policymaker. So let's imagine two policymakers talking to each other at that point. One saying to another one, "We have done everything we could done. We evolved. We have different kind of funds, different type. We finance different type of projects. What else can we do?" And the other said, "Okay, what about startups? What about entrepreneurship? We are helping companies that are already in operation, but we need to create and help to create new companies. Okay, how can we do that? Well, all entrepreneurs need money. They need money to develop their ideas, and at the same time, they need some support to develop their ideas. Okay, but we are the public sector, so we don't know how to evaluate this kind of projects. Okay, so let's do what we do best. What we do best is to provide finance, to provide subsidies to others to develop this process. Why don't we, instead of giving money directly to these entrepreneurs, why do we provide some support to create seed funds, to create venture capital funds? Okay, great idea. Let's do it. Also, we need to support this process. Why don't we create incubators? Okay, let's do that. So the next couple of years of the next decade, the focus was on that. But after this process, what happened? Okay, we have financing, we had funds, we have incubators, but we didn't have projects. Okay, so we have the environment, but we didn't have entrepreneurs with ideas. The seed capital and the venture capitalists were complaining about the lack of projects. And that's where Start-Up Chile entered into the action. Start-Up Chile has a very basic idea. The idea was pitched to the Ministry of Economy by an alumni, a Stanford alumni. He was fresh out of his MBA, and he saw that in the US there were a lot of his classmates. They want to start a business in the US, but they have to leave the US because of visa problem. And he thought, why don't we bring these people to Chile? Why don't we lure them to go to Chile and develop their idea in Chile? Okay, how do we do that? Well, we can offer them a working visa for 1 year. We can offer them some equity money. At the first pilot of Start-Up Chile was $40,000, and we can provide some co-working space, only with the obligation to stay in Chile for at least 6 months to develop their project. So what Start-Up Chile did was to bring foreign entrepreneurs to Chile to develop their project in Chile in order to try to change the culture and to ignite an entrepreneurship process in Chile. Today, Start-Up Chile has evolved, have different programs within Start-Up Chile. Each of them focus in a different stage of the process of entrepreneurship. But what is most important, I think, is not the money that they provide, but to all the activities that they do in order to develop a community of entrepreneurs, to mingle of these people in order to change the culture, the entrepreneurship culture in Chile. They have networks, events, even a Start-Up Chile Academy. In 2015, they were about more than 4,000 activities implemented. Meetups, meetings, seminars, boot camps, etc. And over 2,100 people attended to these activities. But I think what is most interesting about this case is the type of people that is running and participant. You can see in these people something, a different feeling. These are not typical public servants. These are young, very motivated people that want to make a change and also speak the same language of the entrepreneurs. For example, they have these demo days, they have these pitch days in order to and attract different experienced people in venture capitalists from around the world and create this kind of event where the entrepreneurs have to present their projects and get this the finance.
Nicola, let's try to drop out to 1 minute, please.
Yes, I know. It's like only 1 minute. I'm finished. Yeah. And well, as an evaluation impact of this project, is the startups. When Start-Up Chile was created, they had two main objectives: to change nation culture and position Chile as innovation hub. And in some way, they did it. Start-Up Chile was a tipping point. There's a before and after Start-Up Chile in terms of how entrepreneurship was looked within the country. But also they did some economic evaluation in 2019. About near 2,000 startups went through this process of Start-Up Chile from 85 countries. 1/4 of them are Chileans, and the other 3/4 are foreign. They have a very nice survival rate, 54.5%, and the evaluation, the formal evaluation of the 1/5 of these projects is near $1,500 million of the whole group. Just to finish, as a takeaway, I think there are for me three messages. First, the design of a policy instrument, and use in this case, is a continuous learning process. And one should not be afraid of trial and error. The Start-Up Chile started as a pilot. It started also as a startup, and it was evolved during the last decade with this trial and error. Also, the development of an entrepreneurship ecosystem is a systemic challenge. There's no one silver bullet. You have to focus in different areas of the problem, not only one. And even though Start-Up Chile is important, this is not the only thing that was happening in this area. Also, and I think it's very unique in the Start-Up Chile, you need to bring the right people for the right task. In this case, they are entrepreneurs supporting entrepreneurs, and they differentiate very well with the other part of the organization that this has a more traditional approach. Sorry if I run, but we can discuss some of these issues during our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicolo. Thank you very much for this. And I think, as you can see, it's very interesting case in terms of not just using one instrument, but in fact a portfolio, right? A combination of instruments. There was some comment. There was earlier on. There was somebody commenting on, how to use the immigration policy as part of this, and this is exactly what happened here. An example of how this idea of connecting innovation systems can work by drawing from external knowledge and experience and of course money and ideas, right? So I think it's an interesting case, but if there is,
actually I would just raise my hand by mistake, but I think these two cases are very interesting because they bring together several aspects that are important to understand. First, you see the cases of Belarus are about funding. Okay, let's do funding. And they've successfully been able to achieve some funding. They've given us some recommendations of to go about funding, how to create venture capitalists, and how the basis of creating this venture capital, they've learned and evolved into improving their services to entrepreneurs. The Chile context, on the other hand, is slightly different. They had that already. They tried that, and that didn't work. Okay, that was not enough. So they said, well, we have to do something else. And we have to create entrepreneurs. So they started with Start-Up Chile, which is of creating entrepreneurs by bringing them from abroad, rather than use local entrepreneurship. Of course, the impact of this will be that the foreign entrepreneurs will create a network of entrepreneurs that will feed on local entrepreneurs and will eventually develop the local ecosystem. But I wanted to ask you, where were the failures in Startup Chile, Nicolo? What has not worked and why? And also that will apply to Ralph too. Where were the mistakes in both of these cases?
Nicolo, would you like to answer that?
Yes. It depends because the I think that people that criticize Startup Chile focus on the evaluation that they haven't created like a unicorn, or they haven't the financial reward of the project is not so important. But this is or they are financing very low tech projects that is a web page that provides food for pets, for example. Yeah, and I think that some of these critics are right, but Startup Chile was at the beginning was not created with this purpose. Was created with the purpose to change the Chilean culture about entrepreneurship, and I think that they did it. It's not that it's very difficult to in public policy to put all the success in one specific instrument, but at least Startup Chile was created in the right moment, and you can see what was before and what is after in terms of entrepreneurship culture in Chile. Other things were happening at the same time, and not everything was. You cannot attribute everything to Startup Chile, but I think that they have been successful, and at least in terms of marketing, Chile was put on the map in terms of entrepreneurship. They raised in the rankings. About 6 countries asked for the help to Startup Chile in order to create, to mimic to copy the Startup Chile project, and about 50 other countries after Startup Chile they created their own process.
Thank you, Nicolo. Thank you, Ralph. Would you like to say something in terms of where are the mistakes?
Yes. Well, I wouldn't necessarily speak of mistakes, but certainly of remaining weaknesses. And I think in the case of Belarus, they're clearly on the side of the business environment. As I said in my presentation, there's a high level of human capital in Belarus, and we have some examples of very successful innovative entrepreneurship in the software industry in particular. But that's in a way an industry that can cope particularly well with deficiencies in the business environment because it has short time horizons for turnaround. It does not necessarily require a lot of capital, et cetera, et cetera. And we don't see the same dynamism in other sectors. Part of the reason is because a lot of sectors are dominated by incumbents that are under state control, that enjoy state support. So it's very difficult for new innovative companies to break in. The playing field is not necessarily level. And then there are other weaknesses in the business environment in terms of red tape, et cetera, et cetera. And in general, I would say what Nicolo talked about, creating an entrepreneurial culture is also a challenge for Belarus. It's a society where risk-taking entrepreneurial activity is not necessarily broadly accepted as desirable. So a lot of work to be done. Startup Chile is certainly a good one that, and as I said also in my presentation, this private-public venture capital scheme is one possible solution to one part of the problem, but it has to certainly be complemented by other policies on the demand side, improving the climate for innovative entrepreneurship.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you. I don't see much hands raised or comments, but I'm sure you have something to share with us. I think there is, there's a lot of work going and people talking around now, incubators, startups. I'm sure many have experiences that you could share with us. As you can see, of course, it's important to understand the context and a bit of the history. And something that maybe we're not considering here is, and that's the reason why we do this kind of webinars, is that many of these instruments also require some experience or some people who have understanding of some of the complexities of this. And that's sometimes what we give for granted in the policy making. We assume that policymakers are ready and they have the experience and they have the tools, but might not be the case. So if any other of my colleagues from the IATT would like to share a different experience, of course we are missing, for example, Africa or Asia, but yeah, Clovis.
No, it's not really to share a different experience, but just to make a comment on the Startup Chile again. It's just that it's interesting that the way that they set up the whole institution out a little bit outside of the normal traditional structure of the government, with entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs. It also creates like a state program instead of a government program. And in many countries, that may help to give continuity to a program. So it's interesting to also see the political economy aspects of this kind of policy instruments. Just this comment.
Thank you, Clovis. Ahmad, can you please, can you please unmute yourself?
Yes.
And let us
Hello.
know.
You hear me?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I would like to talk a little bit about the experience of Lebanon. You know, we have there is many startups that have begun. Mostly, it was in collaboration with the Association of Lebanese Industrials and with the other association, with the Lebanese government. There is an incubator in Lebanon, which is very interesting, that works well to help young entrepreneurs, very tech. And some universities also, because we went through the Ministry of Education and Higher Education to develop this culture of entrepreneurship and innovation in the universities. Many universities in Lebanon created their proper, center of entrepreneurship, and even they implement a kind of this culture of entrepreneurship in the programs. Because it's not only a course that we could give at the university about entrepreneurship, which is very important. That we have 4 or 5 universities actually that have their proper incubator, proper startup to help students that have new ideas develop. Which is interesting that we have done in Lebanon. Every year we do competitions, and we try to have a group of students from different universities, not from only one university. We ask students, and with the support of AUF, Johnson University Francophone, and with the support of many, even UNESCO, many other really NGOs and the Association of Industrials. And what we have discovered that this culture exists in Lebanon. We have it. But as our colleagues said, most of the time they don't know about intellectual property, they don't know about the aspect of finance, they don't know about the regulation of this process of innovation, and we must support them to develop that. This is a small experience we have done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Yeah, we already saw now in the case of Chile, the diaspora is important, the immigration, but also, as you mentioned here, in other countries, the youngsters are an important group that needs to be somehow benefiting from this. Mr. Roy Mujira, can you? I see your hand raised. Can you please unmute yourself and share with us your comments?
Thank you very much, Fanado. Thank you, colleagues from Nairobi, Kenya. I'd like to share a little of our experience. In 2013, Kenya enacted the Science, Technology and Innovation Act, which created the National Commission for Science, Technology and Innovation, which is a successor of the National Council for Science and Technology, basically to regulate the conduct in the area of science, technology and innovation, and also to advise government on matters related to ST&I. At the same time, the law also established the Kenya National Innovation Agency, and this is where I'm coming in, and the National Research Fund. Ideally, in the statement within the Act, the National Research Fund was established to mobilize resources for the national innovation system. But what we have observed over time is the research fund has gone into the traditional financing of research in institutions, the classical research that you imagine in universities, in research institutions that also contribute to capacity building in terms of scholarship, PhD degrees, and master degree levels. We haven't had a fund or a financial mechanism instrument set aside for startups. And I think what I have also known in the recent past, the discussions are ongoing, reforms are being carried out with a view of apportioning part of that research fund to become like a kite where upcoming startups and entrepreneurial innovations can be supported. However, Nairobi is home to a number of very successful tech hubs based on ICT and software development, quite a number that have been very successful in terms of supporting young innovators realize the dreams of moving their innovations to the marketplace. So this could be a case study as well. We are pursuing this within the context of the Big Four agenda of the government to support manufacturing and also agriculture processing, which is part of what we intend to pursue under the STI for SDGs roadmap. I just wanted to share that experience, Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity also to contribute.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That's been interesting also. I mean, now you're introducing the idea of, it's not just a plain field. Also, you might have some sectors of where you are very good at. Noor, can you please, it's not something quick, we need to move on, but if you have some comments, please welcome to share with us. Thank you.
So I'm Yoslan Noor from UNESCO. I'm responsible for the Promoting Culture of Innovation program in UNESCO. Within this program, we conduct several activities. Among them, it is to support the startup companies. So what we do in UNESCO, first, we work at the policy level. We provide the member state with innovation policy advice. We help the country to formulate their innovation policy, and then after we follow with the technical assistance in development of the innovation platform, in this case, technology business incubator. So we train the manager of technology business incubator, and if that in the incubator doesn't exist, we help them to develop the institution. And then when they have the incubator, they will have the startup companies. We also provided the training and capacity building for the manager of the startup companies. So all of this, we do it in very systematic way like this. In fact, it is to respond to the issue that Dr. Mugira explained. It is what Dr. Mugira explained. It is the general problem in the developing countries. So this, the first thing is to convince the government to support these startup companies, especially during this COVID-19 pandemics. You see, there are a lot of initiative from the government to support the enterprises, the industry, the small medium enterprises, but very, very few initiative to support the startup companies. Startup companies is very, very important, very important. What is the impact of the COVID-19, the startup companies? First, it is limit the extension of the existing one or kill the existing startup companies, and then reduce the establishment of the creation of the new startups. The first one, and then this startup need the liquidity, they need the immediate help from the government. So beside the immediate help, they need also the long-term assist, how to say, the long-term policy that can allow them to develop after the COVID-19 crisis. And it is very important for us to convince the government to help these startup companies, and then and helping the government this for us is to develop, to help them to develop the business opportunity in the country. When there is a business opportunity is there, the investor will come, the money will come. So this we need it is to create the business opportunity, which is different from one country and other countries. This is not the same business opportunity in Belarus and in Chile. It is completely different. It is also different in Asian countries and in Africa. It is my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I welcome everyone once again, and to those of you who managed to go through the exercise and send me some responses, thank you very much. So what was the idea here? The idea was to bring things a bit down to earth, to go to concrete examples of what is happening in many developing countries. The examples for the cases were chosen because I actually have met these people personally. I've talked to them, I've heard them out, and I've tried to convey some of their messages to the policymakers that I would see later during the day or the week during my missions on doing these STI policy reviews for UNCTAD. So here I've chosen 4 of these particular enterprises or entrepreneurs. And just to recap, for those who have perhaps not had the time to get into the cases, case text, I only have 14 of possible 30 responses on the questionnaire, so I assume that half have not read them. So AgriTools, what does AgriTools do? AgriTools, they, among other things, they make an attachment for a 2-wheel tractor that turns into a 4-wheel tractor. Why do they do this? Because the demographics in the villages have changed. Young people are leaving the villages, and older women or men are left in the villages, and they cannot handle the heavy 2-wheel tractors that they already have. So this enables older men and women to use the actual 2-wheel tractors that are already in their possession. And the way they manufacture them is they have made a prototype and they just use the prototype to copy parts. There's no design studio, there's no fixed measurements, there's nothing. The tests were done behind the actual warehouse in the field, and these 2-wheeler attachments are selling very well, apparently. The next one is Quick Cuts. This is a fellow who developed a 1-cut, a quarter of the price haircut. It is a business model development, very similar to EasyJet or Ryanair. You get a lower quality service for a much lower price. He takes all his bookings only by SMS, and now he's developing an app to do so. The cost of training people to open successive shops is very low because he focuses only on one particular technique. BinoPay is a company that actually makes credit cards for school children. Why school children are not allowed to take their mobile phones or cash to school when they board during the week. Many children around the world do weekday boarding. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things that children can spend their money on and not necessarily good. So this type of card, which is loaded through a mobile money wallet by their parents, in this way the parents can control what the children spend on and how they spend their money, and teaches them financial accountability. So it's kind of a fintech for excluded people, meaning children, but has also spread to use for impoverished people living in rural areas, and more recently to the refugee community who receive financial support through from NGOs and IGOs through the use of this type of tool. Finally, there's EcoMill. This is a venture which produces artificial lumber. It collects waste from plastic bags and bottles, shreds it, melts it, and produces telephone poles, fence poles, and other planks for making garden furniture and benches and so forth. So they are cleaning up the environment as well as producing a new, better product which requires zero maintenance and lasts basically forever. So these are the 4 cases that were presented. According to the survey, Ecomil was judged to be the most innovative one, and Binope was the second most innovative one. Having said that, the only of the 4, the only one that did not have any votes for no innovation was Binope. So a few people have judged both Ecomil and Quickets and AgriTools as innovation. On the second question of underlying innovation in each case, this is a very interesting response, because what it shows is that basically you cannot have an innovative product or service with avoiding to have an underlying innovative technological process or technology in production delivery. On top of that, it's very much related to business model innovation. So when we talk about supporting innovation, if we get too much on the product side of things, we miss a point. If we get too much in the process and technology, industry, production, delivery, we again miss a point. If we don't talk about support in terms of business model innovation and all the actual functions that people do while doing business, meaning finance, human resource management, and so forth, we are again missing the problem. Only 3 people, only 3 votes were awarded to there's no innovation in any of the cases. So all the cases were judged to be innovative to a certain extent for the most time. So having gone through this, my question was, essential question is, what are then the main policy challenges? Because the problem with the discussion we're trying to have here is, given on the one hand the challenges for innovation and today for entrepreneurship and innovation, so what are the main policy challenges that we face as people who either develop or implement a certain type of policy? And with that in mind, the specific question is, which policies would be relevant for any or all of the firms and entrepreneurs? So please try to reflect now, what policies would be relevant for these firms and entrepreneurs? Where should there be some priority? Where should be with emphasis? And I would ask Zhengmei to actually go now to the actual Mentimeter, please. We can move on then.
Yes.
So if you can release the screen, I will go back to my okay. Okay, is that better?
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah.
So what do we see here? Key policy instruments in your country. When you look at it from a policymaker's point of view, the key policy instruments are R&D funding and local entrepreneurship and business incubation support. This is okay, but when you actually consider now the real cases of entrepreneurship and what balance by today's discussion is intellectual property rights. 2 days last week, no one thought intellectual property rights are important. Now 13% of the responses say that it is important. Entrepreneurship and business incubation is about the same, but what is much larger when you view things from an entrepreneurial support is this industrial and tech parks and clusters. As well, support for private demand and firms, which was completely off the map last time. Finally, and this is something that is key and that I find all the time when I travel to various countries and talk to entrepreneurs, tax incentives. One of the reasons why we have a high failure rate of startups, and that I find everywhere, is that startups usually burn capital for a couple of, maybe a year or 2, or even more years. This burn capital is a kind of a Western expression. Basically, people pay to keep their startup alive out of their own pocket by doing other things in the meantime. And so the problem is that many firms, startup, they're earning some revenue, but they're not break even yet. So they're developing a loss. And the problem is that they're covering this loss out of their own expense. Taxing companies that are startups and that are experiencing losses may be not a good way of keeping them alive. So there has to be some more thought on this. On the other hand, talking to people in the ministries of finance and so forth, their basic goal is to actually keep the budget of the country alive, and they look for any opportunity to tax enterprises, firms, innovators, anyone. One of the key issues when I spoke to the fellow from AgroTools says that the problem is that the government keeps changing the taxes twice a year, and that they cannot absolutely keep up with what are the changes, and wind up paying all kinds of penalties and delays and so forth. What is also interesting is that we have a similar position on R&D funding, which is good. However, when you look at the science and the science side of grants, is that it is much less, and this genuinely coincides with my perspective that when you're approaching in a development context the entirety of the STI problematic, you have to focus on the I, give a decent consideration of the T, and leave the S basically where it is. Because what you see in practice is that there's an underfunding of the innovation part and a lack of support for innovation part, some support for the technology part, and a lot of support, a lot relatively speaking to what the capacity of the country is, not a lot in absolute terms, to the science part. And this needs to be rebalanced. One of the reasons why this happens is because giving precedence to science is fairly risk-free, because the outcome of that is research papers, and no one can take a research paper saying that, well, it did not succeed. So with that, move to the as you judge that AgroTools is the most EcoMill is the most innovative part. We're going to have a couple more questions about EcoMill, but just to quickly go through this case. What does Eco do? It recycles the plastic waste into a green wood alternative. It takes plastic bags and plastic bottles, melts them, combines them with recycled wood, so with old wood and dust, and creates, as you see in the picture, posts and pylons that can be used for fencing, for street lighting, and also makes planks for all kinds of outdoor furniture. It's basically an indestructible product as much as the plastic itself is indestructible. And this story underlines the idea that eco-business in waste recycling is actually a business opportunity. It's not something that you do because it's good for the SDGs and needs some kind of a huge subsidy or a program or a grant or anything. There are actually business opportunities in circular economy. All that is needed to be done is to help these innovators and entrepreneurs recognize and support them in establishing the companies. It is based on own funding and an international grant. There was a rejection from bank loans because the banks required more cover, so more equity than the actual size of the loan. And STI funding was outright refused because the people who are running the STI fund in the particular country said that there's no research and development or science involved in producing plastic wood replacements. The process and the recipe is kept offsite in a safe, interestingly enough. When I asked why, the lady here, Bolan, all the names are fake, by the way. Well, when I asked her why is it kept offsite and safe, she said that's what apparently Coca-Cola does, and it's been doing it for a large number of years. So there's the IP angle to that. Research was refused by the university because there was no academic potential in the actual in any of the research outcomes. The university visited and they could not see what they would actually research and write papers about. Clients are usually individuals and private companies. Interestingly enough, the EcoMills is not able to compete in public tenders because they do not satisfy capital requirements. They are still a small company, even though they are quickly growing. But the total value of their warehouse, the machines, most of the machines are second or third hand that have been brought up to some level of productivity and safety. All this put together actually does not allow them to compete in for public procurement. The competitors are lumber importers. Taking in the knowledge of how waste happens in the city in which they are functioning, yes, I'm finished. So they are now developing a waste management app, And the employment prospects are seen as very positive for the next couple of years. On top of that, they're reducing the threat from local deforestation and logging, and in this way helping implement the rather restrictive logging regulations and compensating for the rising timber prices. So what is the policy request on their side? They told me, well, perhaps increase the focus on the innovation end of STI. So this is like a small recap of the story, and I think we can go to the Mentimeter questions. We want you to specifically focus on the case of eco-mills. So maybe should we take some questions about eco-mills before, or should we dive into the actual?
Well, actually, yeah, we have maybe like 3 more minutes. Can you take one Mentimeter question, and then we wrap up to have the final wrap up.
So Fernando, which question shall we take of the 4? What do you think?
Well,
how about what is the innovation of EcoMill actually doing? Because we've discussed intellectual property, we've discussed a bit of finance, we've discussed the motivation of entrepreneurs. So how about what is the innovation of EcoMill actually doing? Let's take that question for
just for the participants to wrap up, and maybe.
And then we can wrap up after that. Yeah, okay. So,
and after this, we would like to have just a few more minutes for Cornelia and Clovis to tell you a bit of what is the next steps and to get some feedback from you, right? So if you don't mind, 10 more minutes of your time. Thank you very much.
In general, you know, the key policy problem, you know, that we find, and I hope some of these cases have described this, is that policy looks very different from the point of view of the policymaker and from the point of view of the beneficiary of the policy. And it is a very strong recommendation, and we do recommend this in all our STI policy reviews, that the people who are in policy have to personally, in their own capacity and competence, go out and reach out to the actual entrepreneurs, innovators, firms, and industries. If they are just discussing the issue of STI policy among other ministries and assume that the other ministries, such as if there's an STI ministry, so if the STI ministry assumes that the other ministries are the Ministry of Commerce and Industry and the Ministry of Health and so forth, they are actually missing the picture. Because ministries tend to talk amongst each other in a one kind of language. And when you actually go to the factory floor and talk to the actual people working there and managing these companies and trying to eke out earnings and profit and see their perspective on what kind of policy support they would need, it's a very different perspective with very different bias and emphasis. So the idea here is that, you know, one cannot develop the STI policy in isolation of the actual beneficiaries. Unfortunately, this is what happens very often, and this is why ineffective or poorly implemented STI policies around the world. And this is why we have this kind of work agendas on the national level in many countries with national commissions, science, technology, innovation, but also in the UN world with our interagency testing here. So once again, thank you very much, and I'm prepared to follow up any questions on the chat, or if there is a very burning issue at this point, please let me know. But I'm mostly done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Timo. Thank you, and thank you all for your patience and for continuing to stay with us. With this, I would avoid a long wrap up. I would just pass the floor. If I may just say, you saw in this webinar, the idea was to show you a bit of the complexity of looking into the things. I mean, the last graph was very interesting to show how in this idea of combining necessity and market opportunity was very interesting, how you actually agreed. I showed that on the screen. In terms of the complexity and all what Dimo said already, in terms of collaboration and capacity building, and part of the reason why we are here. Having said that, I would just like to ask you to stay for a few more minutes while Clovis and Cornelia make the final remarks to this webinar. Thank you very much to everybody in the panel. Thank you very much for you. And Clovis, Cornelia, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fernando. And thank you very much, all colleagues, for staying with us at this time. We would like to use these final moments to reflect a little bit on what we have learned from these 3 sections, not only today, but the previous ones as well on the policy instrument today. Also to think on how can we move forward with this pilot and what could be other trainings that we'd like to have. So we just have 3 more questions for you on Mentimeter, and we will try to do it quite quickly. If Zheng could pose the first one, please take 1 minute to answer this one. What is the key takeaway message of this series of webinars, not only today, but considering the 3 webinars? So while the messages are coming, we see already things related to the message today, related to, for instance, IP and other things, but also things related to these 3 the series. And you mentioned STI ecosystem development. You mentioned stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement was one key takeaway that we had also seen on the first session. You talk about policy instruments, how important they are, and you also mentioned how important it is to have develop policies and instruments for innovation that really support entrepreneurship. Yeah, those are some of the things that we're receiving. The urgency of integrated and transformative approach for STI ecosystem. Yeah, this idea that the importance of the ecosystem as a whole. We see that there are many actors involved, all the interlinkages and between them. So we say innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystems. Yeah, so we see many of your response related to the ecosystem of innovation and how important is that. And that reflects also this multi-stakeholder partnership and so on. Thank you very much for this one. We have the next question. Can I, if I can please ask Zheng Mei to pose the next one. Now I would like you to reflect a little bit on how you plan to use this knowledge in your own work. So please tell us if you are planning to, or you are in a process to revise a policy or devise a policy instrument or mentor people doing this or coordinate work in that direction. Please let us know what is your plan with this knowledge. For the second question, how you plan to use this knowledge? So we have some of the response as input to policies and their monitoring evaluation, to inform the review of exercises. People thinking in doing an STI policy, so the knowledge experience will be relevant there. So this being very important, to share the knowledge was very important. And also to understand the place of the relevant stakeholders. So a lot of some of the answers are related to actually designing effective policies. So we are very happy to see that this work will help you on that. Inputs of review of policy development for SDGs. Also, someone saying that use this knowledge to update STI policy and align with the SDGs. So this is great. It's great that we see that is really aligned to the ideas that we have. And since you will be involved on this process, let's go to the third question that we would like to ask is what are your suggestions for future activities like this? So Zheng Mei, could you share that the next one? So what are the policy instruments or area that you'd like us to have additional training so we can go deeper on? We have discussed many policy instruments on the second session. Today we have discussed also many of them related to entrepreneurship. So is there anyone that you'd like to go a little bit deeper and to have additional training? Yeah, so we see some response coming. So monitoring evaluation for policy implementation. Yeah, that's very relevant. We didn't have much time to discuss that series would be great. So intellectual property rights, forecasting, foresighting, very interesting to think about the frontier technology, new technologies coming up as well. Monitor evaluation again, alignment and collaboration with private sector. So some policy instruments, or the area is more related to the alignment with policy with private sector. STI indicators, monitor evaluation. So many requests for monitoring evaluation. Technology readiness levels, interesting this one as well, to how any instruments to assess that. PPP for innovation, technology transfer policies and facilities, roadmaps, technology foresight, deep dive on policy formulation, implementation, monitoring. So that will be what we do with this kind of training when we do have 1 week training, policies for startups, evaluation, and STI. So it seems that many of the issues related to monitor evaluation, this see clearly one area that many of you would like to take a look. And thank you very much for all this response. We also consider that, and we will also send you a questionnaire later on. I think we had a very good series of these webinars. I would like now to invite Cornelia to give us a quick wrap up of this series now. Thank you, Cornelia.
Yes, thank you very much, Clovis. I think, yes, we are coming to the end of this session, but also the end of this series of 3 sessions. Perhaps I can invite all participants, all colleagues from other UN agencies that are present to switch on their cameras so that we can have a nice ending of this session. And I would like, on behalf of the UN-IATT work stream on capacity building on STI for SDGs, to thank you all for your participation, not only in this session today, but also in the previous sessions. And it was really a very good experience to listen to your comments, to discuss with you about these important questions around policies and policy instruments. So we would like to express our appreciation for your presence, participation, and really valuable contribution for this session. I would like to mention that this was our first kind of piloting of online sessions. This was the first time that we worked with our group on such a format. We had also to condense these sessions into very short time. The previous trainings that we organized were throughout almost a week, so it was kind of challenging for us to cover things that we would like to exchange more with you. And as Clovis mentioned, we will build on this first experience. We would organize more sessions in the coming year. And therefore, we would like to invite you for providing us with these very interesting views, suggestions of new topics, what questions we could maybe spend a little bit more time in discussing with you. I would like also to mention that for this first series of sessions, we invited also representatives of countries that our agencies are having some ongoing cooperation and activities in STI policy. Therefore, we find it very interesting also to exchange with you on these specific topics. As it was mentioned in our previous communication, we created also a channel. You received all a link to which you could connect, Microsoft Teams link. And in this channel, we have uploaded all the presentations, the video recordings from the 3 sessions. So please let us know if you have some difficulties in accessing this link. But this would be also our way to keep some contact with you for the future. So I think with this, we are closing this session, maybe we can have this final group picture, and perhaps few last words to say that it was also a great learning experience for us as well, from the different UN agencies. I think these activities and interactions are also helping us creating a little bit more synergies and building on our complementarities to better offer our services to you. So thank you very much, and thank you to all for your patience and connecting so late for some of you or very early for others. And we look forward to meeting you again for our next session. We will also share a small survey early next week, so that you can also have a little bit time to evaluate a little bit these sessions more in depth. So thank you very much, and stay well and stay safe, all of you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.